All right, welcome back. We are COMP125. That's client-side web development at Centennial, and it's in the summer 2020 semester, and it's week 9, part 2 of our broadcast. We're still talking about AJAX. So we've gone through a lot of this PowerPoint. I'm using this PowerPoint just as a header. That's all I'm doing. But basically, we've gone through most of this. We've talked about different ways, different things to load. And we've kind of gone through most of this, but what I've been working on a lot with you guys is this idea of request response and the fact that it is asynchronous. I'm closing this down. And we have a project we were working with. I've updated my Visual Studio Code, so it has all my plugins finally, right? So you can see I got like some. It might look different than how it did last day. But anyways, you can see I got tons of plugins here. And so what we did last day was when I went to control backtick, and if I run light server, just to continue from what we did, then it's going to pull up this web page, right? And you can see that by default it goes here, and I don't get any kind of highlighting here. And if I click on home, as an example, I go to my index.html, no highlighting, but products and services and all this stuff, you see they work temporarily, right? But the highlight's gone. But all these pages are being injected. That's the other thing to think about. So all these pages are being injected into the main pages. So what's happening is there's a couple ways we've done this now. In my index.html, as an example, I've got a header, empty header, an empty main, and an empty footer, and we're injecting the header, injecting the content, and injecting the footer. That's what's happening, okay? And all of the pages now look identical. The only difference at the top is our title. All right, so example, home, index.html has home, contact.html is contact, and about.html is about, but the rest is identical. So now we're at the stage where can we delete the main pages here, about, contact, products, and services, and then change the URL that's at the top, the thing that we see here, to make it seem as if we're in a certain spot. So how do we change the URL? Well, remember, if I go to my scripts here for a second, let's go to my app.js. And what I did last time was to make it easier. You can collapse these sections. You can, in VS Code, you can collapse all this code here, so that you only see the code that you need to see, right? So I'm just collapsing. These are all the different content functions, right? Home content and so on. So these are all the ones I'm just collapsing them all, so we only see the ones we need to see. And the one we need to see right now is start. So the way start works, because it's the first function that triggers, is we go here, we get the document title. And on the document title, depending on what the document title is, we load the content. So this paradigm that we've been using, if we're going to go with a single page, has to change, because our title is not going to be driving our navigation anymore. Okay, it's going to be something else. Okay, so that's the first thing. So how do we change the URL? Right. So remember that we're using the BOM, which is the browser object model. And if I look at the window object, if I would go window dot, you can see that I have something called location. Right. So if I want to do a debug.log, let's just do that first. So before we load our header, as an example, let's just do an experiment, right? So loading our header, by the way, what this is, and if we go to definition for the header is using AJAX. That's what this whole process is. 1, 2, 3. We're going to load the partial header.html, which is our nav bar. And then when it's finished loading, this part here basically says, hey, are you done loading? When you're done loading, do a couple things for me. Get the header, inject it, and then highlight the active link based on the title that we've got. And the title's not really working, so something's broken in here anyway. But and this is the key. The key is when we load the header, we actually load the header HTML partial file, which is inside. We've made a new folder called views, and inside views we have two partial files, header and footer. These are partials, and really so is content. Content is another kind of partial, but it's just partial content. So when I look at, for example, my home, my content is very small. There's nothing here that's really remarkable about most of them, except for maybe contact, which we have our contact page, and products, which we're listing our products from our file. Okay, so that's kind of what we're doing here. So this is where we're at right now. So in my app.js now, and again back to where I was before, down in here, before my loading my header, and let's just do this. I don't want to load anything, okay, at all. No header, no footer. I'm just going to comment all this stuff out, just for now. And the best way to do that, of course, to open up a multi-line comment and go to the bottom. Okay, so I'm kind of doing one of these. So here's this part, and I'm just going to do one thing with Discord here, guys. Sorry, I want to make sure that my I am on mute on Discord. I keep forgetting to do that, and I do apologize for that. That's why you're hearing boop boop, because that's me on Discord, and that's not good. Because then you're just going to hear me the whole way, and you're going to hear sounds going on. So we're going to just make me into do not disturb for a second. Forgot to do that all day today. All right, so yeah. Let's get back to this. So what we've done basically here is comment everything out. And what I want to do, we get to page title, but what I want is actually, and we're going to start with our index.html, and I want to do a console log, and I want to print out my document for, window, not document, window.location. Okay, so I want to see what that does for us, this window location thing, and shows us what it is. So again, if I go back, you're going to see nothing. And then inside, when I inspect, if I go back to my, let's just go back to my main page, which is here. And under console, you're going to see the location is localhost 3000. Here's the location, right? And you can see a couple of things here. Right, I have my host name, localhost, and my href is this localhost 3000 origin and port, right? So that's part of it. And remember that we can always change a couple things. There's also something called navigation. So let's take a look at the difference between this is location, the location object, right, and then navigation. So if I go back to VS Code, let's do that. So console.log, and then I want to do navigator, windows.navigator, and see what I get with that one. So there's two. There's location and navigator. Let's see what I'm getting there. So navigator gives me a bunch of different things. My app name is something that I'm getting. My platform, I'm getting a bunch of, these are all this is all the information that I can get by looking at these different piece parts, right? So my platform, the product is Gecko, which means Gecko is Chrome, as an example, and so on, right? So there's my user agent string. So it looks like I'm coming from Chrome 84, right? Or Safari 537.36. So that's the my user agent string. My user agent string basically tells me I'm coming from a desktop browser that's accessing this, okay, which is kind of interesting. So that is stuff that we can get, okay. I can also check to see if my USB is connected. I can check. I can turn on geolocation and a bunch of other stuff that I have on here. Okay. I'm going slow. So what else can I do with my location? My location also has, again, I have host, host name, port, and so on. So host name, if I just go host name like that. So if I want to say my window location.hostname, right? Then you can see localhost is what I got there. Localhost. Can I assign this? So if I take window location.hostname, can I change this Windows location.hostname to something? Can I say my host name is now equal to, you know, slash? Can I do that? And then if I did that, you can see that immediately it says failed to set the host name property on location. This 3000 is not a valid URL. It's got to be a valid URL that we're setting up at the top. So that's the first name. So host name is slash. If I go slash, like if I go something else, if I go change it to host, let's say host is equal to slash. Let's say if I do that, you know, host is equal to slash. How does that work? And you can see again, it says my host property location. It's not a valid URL. Can't do that, right? So I can read, right? What about href, right? So href is a property, and if I say my property for href is, you know, kind of slash, I want to put a number, like a thing there again. What does that do, right? Well, it does something weird. Take a look at that, what's doing, right? So it's kind of trying to reload and reload and reload over and over again. Title of the page is home. It's going to keep on doing this, almost like an endless loop is what it does, right? Look at that, what it's doing. If I go this instead, right, and I go back out here, it says uncut or invalid token, right, because it doesn't understand what this is. If I actually put href, and if I do something else, let's say for example I put in something like localhost, you're going to see it's the same effect. If I go localhost by itself, like this, you can see that now it's cycling again, right? So href actually changes my location. What about if I said google.ca, right? So if I did that, you can see now it says trying to get localhost 3000 google.ca, right? So that's kind of weird. How about if I just say href index.html, index.html? Can I do that? Right, so save, and then we're back here, and if I refresh, let's go back to this actually. It's kind of frozen. I can see that again, index.html is going to keep trying to load index.html over and over again. So that's what href does. Href actually tries to retrieve or go to that site if it can. And we don't want this, so we're just going to comment it out. All right, so a couple things that we can start controlling what's inside of the URL. And again, if you wanted to try and see that, if I was to Google something like change URL JavaScript, right, in the address bar, so address bar, and without reload, I don't want to reload. How do I do that with a new URL? Then you can see what we can do is we can say window history. There's another thing called history, and you can do something called push state. I'm going to grab this line here. I want to explain what this does. Hash also does it. Location.hash. We'll try both. Okay, so let's try this one first. So instead of doing all this, I want to just grab this part and put it in here. So it says Windows history. Actually, let's just do one of these first. Before we do this part, I want to console log window history. What is that? Window history. All right, so we're going to go back here to localhost 3000. I closed it. Sorry. There. Inspect and go to console. And in the history object, we have a couple things. Length is 2. Scroll restoration is auto. Okay, so not a lot there. Like Windows history doesn't give us a lot to work with. But if I go Windows window.history dot, and if I go to push date like we said before, so let's say I replace that here. So here's my object or string, right? And then the title, and then whatever the new URL is. So when I hover over this, it says, what's my data, right? If any. Title is the title, the new title that I'm going to put in, and my new URL is the URL that I want. So let's leave this blank. Let's say I don't want to put anything out to state. My title, let's say my title is going to be Tom, and my new URL is going to be /Tom. All right, let's see if I can, what happens when I do this. So again, window history push date. I'm not going to change this. I'm going to change my title to Tom and my URL to this. So now if I go back, you can see my / is Tom. The title of the page is home, but this is Tom and this is home. So this is interesting. But this is neat. This is neat. This part right here, which is it's showing Tom. If I go actually enter here, it's not going to do anything if I enter. If I go here and press enter, or even if I go to here and press enter, it's still going to go back to Tom. It's not going to show anything, but it's going to change this. So this is interesting. So Tom, if I took this away, so Tom, it's gone. And if I went back to here again, you can see that this hasn't changed, but this has. And again, if I take this away, it goes back to Tom. Right? Cool. So this gives us an idea of we can do a couple things here. We can change the title if we want to. So now remember that we're setting the title up here to whatever the title is. And what I can do is I can simply set the title to whatever I want to set it to, right? Instead of setting it to my page title and I'm cleaning it this way. Again, remember, we're probably not going to use this methodology anymore into switching. We're not going to switch it this way anymore. Okay. Instead of doing this, we're going to still load the header, and depending on what we click, the header is going to determine where we switch. Okay, that's what's going to happen. So the header is going to drive it, not this part anymore. But this is interesting. The fact that we can do this is interesting. And if I want to, if I say title is equal to Tom, right? I mean, this means my title, but I can go actually document.title, right, is equal to Tom. That's what I really want to do. And if I did that, you can see Tom is up there, and Tom is up here, right? So I can totally spoof what I'm looking at. Like I'm actually looking at one page, but I'm actually here it's showing something, and here it's showing something else. So this idea, this push state idea, is a lot of times what these front-end frameworks do. They mess around with the history, they change the URL, and they change the title so to make it whatever they want. Knowing this, then, let's comment this out. So we're going to comment the next part out. So again, I'm just going to comment everything out now. We have our functionality. Functionality is not going to be deleted. I'm just going to do something different. That's all. And this push state idea is what I want to do. So windows.history.pushDate. I want to move the loader so I can see my header again, load header. I want to see that. And if I go to definition for my loading header, it says header loading. I'm going to use my XHR to load my header and inject it where it has to go. And then I'm going to go immediately to highlight active link. Highlight active link. And it's going to be based on passing a title into my load header, right? So if I go back to where it's called, so load header, notice that there is no title being passed. So I'm going to say title, right? And my title, instead of me setting it up by default, when I first load up my header, my title is going to be equal to whatever I want it to be. So let's say, for example, my title is equal to home. Okay? So if my title is equal to home, then what's going to happen is when I load my header, it's going to go to highlight active link. Highlight active link is going to be activated, right? And it says basically that let my nav anchors document.query selector all I'm going to get a reference for all these, and for each anchor in nav anchors, I'm going to say that get the href attribute, right? That's how this works. And if my title is equal to home or my anchor string is equal to index, one of the two, or my my title is equal to anchor string, then my anchor.class name, the thing that I'm looking at, is going to be equal to nav-link active. Okay, that's what this does. That's how this works. I'm listening for title, for home or index, one of those two things. I've made it home because I've actually set it to home. So now when I go back to my page, which is going to be here, right, as an example, you can see that, let's just refresh. So there is no Tom. It says error, uncaught reference error, title is not defined at start. So let's go to that. And it tells me where, title, because I've taken away let, and I'm using strict, use strict. That's why it's giving me that error. I'm totally fine with that. That's good. That's something I forgot to do, and that JavaScript is helping me with. I'm always happy when JavaScript helps me. I'm just doing this way so I can just set the title to something that I want. Right, title to home. We'll say this document title is also equal to home. Let's just say, and this will be equal to home. Okay, so home, home, home. And when I go back now, you can see this is home, and I've got my home button highlighted. Take a look at that, right? I don't have anything installed here, but this is interesting. So I've got this working. If I click this, it's going to take me to my products page, but then it's going to take me back to home again, right? See that? If I click products, or if I take services, or if I click about, anything I click, right, as an example, it's going to change this stuff back to what it was, right? So this is a key. This stuff here is a key to how I want to get this done. That means that inside of my all right, so in my index, in my my nav links, you can see here I've got index.html, and I don't need this anymore. I mean, I could put them in there, and it's not a bad thing to put in, but these ones here, products, as an example, and services, and about, and contact. These things here, as an example, in my nav bar, aren't really required anymore. These things. Okay? I'm not actually going to go anywhere, right? Same thing with this. If I click on this, what I can do is I can set up so that I don't go really anywhere. I'm staying where I am on my index page. I'm not moving from one end. I'm not reloading as an example at all. So that's the first thing. So I'm not reloading the page. This href hashtag basically is a way of not reloading, right? So if I click now on any one of these things, you can see that I'm not really reloading anything. It's just going to go to home hashtag, and it's going to add that hashtag onto my home link. If I go back to my default page though, like this, right, it redirects me. But if I click any one of these, it messes me up, right? Because it's actually adding a hashtag onto my home. And I don't want that at all, actually. So I want to prevent my default behavior when I click on any one of these links. I want to prevent default behavior, right? So how do I do that, right? Because I'm listening for, these are actual events that happen, right? So I want to stop my href tag from taking me anywhere, right? That's what I want to do. I want to prevent default behavior, right? So how does that work? Remember that my anchor tag, whenever I go into my anchor tag at all, right? When I click on any anchor tag that's in here, right? Anything, any button or whatever, it's going to prevent my default behavior, any anchor tag, right? So that means that I can target all anchor tags, and I can say prevent default behavior, depending on what the anchor tag is, right? And what the ID is of the anchor tag. By the way, I don't have an ID, but I could implement those. So I can say something like an anchor tag with an ID of, remember, I'm only changing it one place, home, right? An anchor tag with an ID of, you know, products. An anchor tag with an ID of services. These are the actual links that are going to be working, right? And the same thing goes with these. Anchor tag with an ID of about. And the last one is an anchor tag with an ID of contact. So this is home, products, services, about, and contact. When I click on any of these, right? Now the one thing that's messed up is the my brand, right? Because my brand itself, which is the little logo that I made or whatever, it's an anchor tag as well up here. So it has an href. Again, what I could do is I could put an ID in here of brand or index or something else. Let's put brand. So now all of the anchor tags have IDs. Okay, and I've done this to every single page. Remember, I'm modifying one partial and it's affecting all pages, which is a really good thing for us. Okay, one partial header and it's affecting all pages. That means that if I go to my app.js, right, and I say that, okay, I want to make, the first thing I want to do, right, is before I do this Windows push state stuff or whatever, right, I want to, and I'm just going to comment this out for now, okay, guys, just to show you this. Document.title is home, sure, no problem. But what I want to do is when I go to my loading my header, as an example, I want I'm going to prevent default behavior. So I'm going to say that, hey, I want to get all anchors. So for all anchors, so let nav links, we'll call them nav links, right, equal to document.query selector all, right? And I'm going to look for an anchor tag, any anchor tags. So for all anchor tags, I could also say query selector, instead of query selector, I can say, you know, get elements by tag name, right? And I can look at the anchor tag. Okay, so that's nav links. Now remember, the nav links won't exist until I load my header. So I want to do this, but I'm not going to get anything at the beginning. This is actually going to be empty, right? So I want to do this inside of the header. Go to definition. So I load the header. I inject in my header. I inject my response text, my inner HTML, and before I do my active links, this part, I want to say my nav links are equal to this, all the anchor tags, and I'm going to say that I want to listen. So nav links dot add event listener, and I'm going to listen for a click event, right? And in my click event, I'm going to have an anonymous function. Can I not do this? Where I can have this event, and I can say that when I click on any of these nav links, right, because they're clickable, that I prevent default behavior. Event.prevent default. Okay, so this is going to prevent my behavior from actually doing anything with these nav links. Okay, let's see what that does. Does it do what I'm asking it to do? Am I able to, using my add event listener, click event, will it do it? So if I go back and if I get a bit of an error, it says nav links that add event listener is not a function. Why? Because I'm looking at a collection of elements. For each nav link, I want to do this. That's what I want to do. This is for each one. So I'm going to say for each, and again, there's different ones. There's for each and for in, right? So if I go for of is what I really want to do. So for every nav link of nav links for each one of these, then instead of doing individual ones, I want to say that all of them I'm going to prevent the default behavior. Now it says nav link is an unknown word, right? It's an HTML anchor. Okay. For every nav link of nav links, and it says const. So why would it say this? Why would it say Navlink unknown word, cspell. Well, it's just an error. It's actually my linter going off. My linter in Visual Studio Code is saying, I don't know what navlink is. Let's just make it link. For every link, just to give my linter a rest. And for every link in navlinks, then add an event listener. Click to the link and make sure my event is prevented default. Let's try that. So now, if I click on home or products or services or about or contact, nothing happens up here. Nothing happens. I don't change my URL, which is important. So if I go here to, thing, and it doesn't matter what I click, including this, nothing happens up there. So that's an important thing. I've prevented the default behavior, the little hashtag that I have my link. It's prevented from working. Okay, but now I've got to take control, and I got to control what's happening here. So depending on when I click on it, I prevent in default behavior, but now this idea that we had down here of changing the window history to make it what it's supposed to be, that's something that we have to modify, right? So I'm going to take this and I'm going to go back up to here. So after I've prevented my default, again, this is inside of load header. I've made a link. I've made a connection to all the links on my page. After everything has been loaded, I'm changing this. And then I'm saying that, hey, you know what I want to do? Instead of /home, what I want, right, is to take the link ID, whatever the ID name is, the attribute, the ID attribute of the link that I've embedded. So again, it's like link.get attribute. And I want to get an attribute that is the ID, whatever the attribute is, right? And this attribute ID, I'm going to say that this is ID. So I'm going to say the ID is the attribute. So again, going back to my header, each of these are attributes, the ID attribute, right? And it has a value, home, product, services, about, contact, and so on, right? So I'm saying, hey, get the ID, store it in this variable called ID, and what I want is / plus ID. You can also do a template string in there if you want. Okay, let's see how this works now. So if I'm here, I'm okay, but if I click on home, then you see this becomes home. If I click on products, this becomes products. Services, this becomes services. About us, contact us. That changes the ID. So it looks like we're hitting one of these pages. And now this is what I want. This thing here, which is the link, if you will, right? So this thing here is where I'm pushing the state. Remember what push state is. The URL is the thing that's changing, right? So I want to get the URL, and that's what's happening here. Okay, so that is what's going on here. Title is something that I'm going to set here. So depending on what I'm clicking on here, I'm not only setting the ID, but I'm changing the title where I want to change the title to whatever the ID is. Now, so remember we have ID, and I can do a bunch of different things. So there is lowercase, I can go toString, and so there's locale uppercase and locale lowercase. There's 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase, right? And so what might behoove us to do to make it simpler for us, right, is when we take the ID, since we're reprogramming it anyway, you might as well put everything in a brand. And I know this is breaking the rules, but what you could do is make this home as well, or index, or whatever. I'm going to make this home, same ID as this one. Okay? Bear with me while I do this. All right, and I'm going to change these to kind of a capitalized instead of all caps, because this is going to help us down the road. So contact. So again, it says home, products, services, about, and contact. And then inside my app.js, I'm going to say my ID is equal to the actual ID, the attribute, and here I'm going to go to lower. right? Which is going to drive this to lowercase. That's what it's going to do. So to lower, it's going to change this ID, which is cap case, to lowercase, which is going to do the same effect. But now, what I want to do is I want to say that my title, right, document.title, right, that's going to be equal to the ID. Okay, document.title is equal to the ID. And now, when it comes to this highlight active link, it's going to be based on document title. Right now, if I go to definition for this one, what I want to pass in here, right, for highlight active link, is whatever the title is. It's going to target that particular class name, that ID. So I'm saying, hey, I want to sanitize it when I send it through here, because I expect it that it's going to be lowercase. I'm looking for the list item with an anchor tag. That's what this is happening. And I'm basically saying that for every anchor in nav anchors, so all my nav anchors, right, I'm getting the attribute for my href in this case, anchor.getAttribute href. And my href is just a hashtag. That's how this is working, right? And then it basically says that, actually, so anchor string is, and I'm gonna print this out for you so you can see what I'm talking about. Now we've got to modify our way of doing things. Anchor string. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So if I don't change anything, then you can see that the anchor string is hashtag, because each of these things here, right? You can see now it's changing this way. Each of these things here is hashtag, right? Right? Does that make sense? It doesn't matter. This is wrong now. This is not going to work anymore, right? I don't want to listen to this, right? To highlight active link. My highlight active link, when I connect to the anchors, this is actually the easiest things to do now. What I want is for any list item, I'm looking for the list item itself with an anchor tag, right? And that means all of these. These are all list items with anchor tags. But I'm targeting the list item, not the anchor. A list item with that has an anchor inside of it is what I'm saying, right? A is the anchor tag, right? I want to look at the anchor ID now, not the anchor href. So instead of anchor ID, instead of anchor href, I'm looking at the anchor ID. So going back to this, instead of this anchor get attribute href, it's going to be anchor get attribute ID. All right, which is exactly what I did before. And what I want to do is I want to take that ID, and it requires me again to go lowercase, right? Anchor, depending on the ID, if the title is equal to that ID, right, whatever that title is, then I'm going to change my ways, right? Title is equal to ID. Title is the document title, right? So right now I'm saying that the document title has to be lowercase, but the document title is actually uppercase, right? And if I'm matching them anyway, right, and I'm changing the document title on switch, then I don't have to pass in a document title at all with what it is. So document title is really what I want here, not title. So let's get rid of this. So highlight active link won't need this anymore. All I need to check is the document.title. Right? If the document title is this, or the anchor string is index, it will never be indexed, because the anchor string is always going to be something that looks like this. So home. Maybe it's going to be home. I don't think so. In fact, I don't even need to do this anymore. If the document title is exactly equal to the anchor string, it's this part right here now that I need, because it's never going to be otherwise. I'm never going to have a case anymore where my document title is not going to be the anchor string. In fact, it's kind of a redundant function that I have here. Where I had need of it before, I don't have to have need of it now. I can actually do it somewhere else. But let's suppose that I'm going to keep the same structure that I had before. And this is anchor string. My anchor string is going to be my anchor string the substring. I'm going to go 0 to the anchor string.length.html and blah blah blah. I don't need to do this either. My anchor string is my anchor string. I've already got it from my ID, so therefore there's no need for us to do this at all. So I can just comment this part out too, just for now. Okay, so it's kind of a much shortened version of the same thing. Let's go back to my code where I call that thing. So highlight active link does not need a title. I don't have to pass that in there at all because I changed my document title right here. I should be good to go. Again, minor modifications to make my thing work the way it is. I'm starting from scratch here, and again, let's go back to the beginning. If I click on home, right, or products or services, you can see now that those things are highlighted: home, products, services, about us, contact us. All the highlighting works except for when I come here for the first time and I got nothing. So this is something where it says home here, right? But home, lowercase home with a lowercase h. Why? Well, because that's what I did somewhere else. So let's remember we're looking at title, still switching by title, but what's happened is, back to this, my document title is home, right? Document title, it starts at home. I don't have to say this anymore, where we say load header title, right? Load header title, I'm passing in this. I know that it's my document title that I want, which is what I'm changing right here. Okay, so when I go in here, I don't have to actually pass anything in because it's the document title that I'm passing in, which is something that I already have. I don't need to do this anymore. So this can go. And this can go. Again, I'm just simplifying one thing at a time, right? So load header, it goes through, and when I do this, I go back to this page. You can see it's home, and it's highlighted immediately, right? Now, products, services, right? But take a look at how home is highlighted, and about, and contact, right? Because something else is changing this, because I've got both highlighted. Look, I got both highlighted. Products and home are highlighted, not just one, right? So why is that? What's highlighting this? So again, it's all driven by this piece right here. I'm looking at for each of the anchors. I'm trying to get my document title, and I'm trying to match it to the anchor string, whatever the anchor string is, right? I'm looking at the ID, and I'm looking at the document title, home, as an example, right? Or the document title is going to be changed to whatever it's going to be, right? So this part I don't need anymore. It's kind of working, but there's still a bug when it comes to my home is always highlighted, right? So again, I could do that right in here. This highlight active link could be, for each of the links that I have, I could check to see if that's the one I'm clicking and then highlight the one that I want, right? For each of the links when I've clicked on a link, it activates it and so on. But here I've just made it separate. I'm just trying to keep the code similar, right? So that we don't have too much duplication. I'm going to go and fix this later, but for now we have part of what we need to get going. Notice that get page title now, this whole piece here, where I go to lowercase and all that stuff, is completely unnecessary. I don't even use get page title anymore because I don't need to. I set the page title from the beginning, so this part can be gone. All right, and you can see that get page title and document.title and all that stuff is gone. I don't need that stuff anymore. I don't need this anymore, right? Because I already have my title and so on, right? So this all is things I can get rid of. And now I can switch my title, right? But instead of switching title, I can switch on document.title. Okay? And instead of home, we'll make it how it is: home, contact, products, services, and about. Okay? So if I did this, and if I did everything right, I may have not, then you can see that I've got my home page, products, right, doesn't switch. So this is something we gotta watch. So products looks here, except for it's not switching. Products, services, it says services here, but this isn't switching. About us and contact us. Okay, those doesn't switch, but we're getting the footer, and we got our index.html title. We're also getting this home, which is a good indicator something is wrong, right? And if I inspect and go to console, it says my header loaded, my home contact loading, and no matter where I go here, 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 or here, home content's always loading. Document.title. Okay. So one thing to note is, even though we changed the document.title, right, then the document.title on my index.html is home. So what we can do is we can wipe this out. So no title. Okay, so this is kind of something that's different. So here we got no title, and you can see that now when we click on these things, they all highlight. So this is active, 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 right? It takes away the home being active all the time, right? Because that's going to be on title, right? You can see that that's the case, actually. That's slightly highlighted than everything else. But no content. So even though the home up here shows what it is, the content that's inside here, right? So that's here and here, is not doing what it's supposed to do. So why is that? Well, let's take a look at document title right here. So load header, and then if I do a console log on document title, right? And if I look at it, let's inspect the page, you can see that my document title is nothing. How's that possible? And now I'm going to remind you how AJAX works. How does AJAX work? I load my header. Is it finished yet, my friends? We don't know, is the answer. Until my header's loaded, I have no title. I don't have a title until my header finishes loading. And that's why I was always loading home, because my index.html page, which is here, had a title that was inside of a title tag that had something in here. So that's why I was going home all the time. And we were mistaken to think we were working. But the reason why this isn't working is because the asynchronous nature of AJAX, right? Of JavaScript too. So if I go to load, go to definition here and load this, what's happening is, yes, I'm loading and whatever, and I'm listening. This listener is happening when it's going to happen, right? It's going to load all this stuff up and change the document title, right? When it wants to, right? When it wants to. But I can't tell when this is done loading. Ready state change is only going to trigger here, right? When this triggers, when ready state change and these two things trigger, then that's the only time that I can guarantee that I can highlight the active link and all that kind of stuff. That's the only time it can happen. Okay? I'm just pointing this out to you so you understand. So really, what I want to do is when it's finished doing, after I highlight the link, then I want to switch it. So it's like, instead of loading my header, I'm loading everything. I can't do anything until my header is loaded, and I got to wait for my header to load before I do my switch, which means restructure. All of this has to be inside of here, load header, the way we have it scripted right now. The same thing with load footer. Actually, load footer doesn't really matter. It's going to happen no matter what. But this part, this document switcher, which loads the content and all that kind of stuff, this part right here, this switcher piece, because it's based on document title, the way we've written it must be based on, you know, this thing switching, right? Because of the way we've written it. Because inside of here, go to definition, right? We don't set any of these attributes here, the ID and blah, 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 and whatever, until we have a nav. And until we have a nav, we have nothing. So, if that's the case, it's best that we take all of this, cut it, and then we go to inside of our, the way we've written it by now, load header, and underneath my document title, right, and underneath this highlight active link, so this is still inside the function, right, I'm going to do the document switching. I'm showing you this because you're going to be like, wait, what? And this content switcher, if you really want to, if it bugs you to be like this, you can make it a little function of its own. But, and then all we have to do is this load footer, right? Load header, load footer. Now I can change these to make sense, but let's take a look and see what this works. So load footer doesn't depend on load header. They don't depend on each other. So it doesn't matter when they load. That's why it's okay to do this. But now you can see that home doesn't do anything yet. Okay, services, about us, contact us. Let's take a look and see what's happening. So now it's still not working, and now that's curious, right? Because document.title, let's print out that document title again, right? Document.title, what is that? Let's do a console log on document title, and let's see what that looks like here, right? And you can see that we have, look, header loaded, footer, and then there's a space. Look at that. That space. And it's like document title is trying to read stuff, even though I've set it here physically. The actual title of the document isn't really changing. But remember what we said. We said that in our index.html, this part, we can access any node, including title. And that's when anything loads, right? Anything. So if I go to the title tag, right, and I want to modify this, is it possible? Well, let's take a look. So if I go back to my app.js, I'm looking at the document. It doesn't care what I'm looking at in the document, right? So document.title as ID changes the top of the title. That's what it does. But what if I changed it in a different way? What if I said something like, okay, document.getElement by tag name, elements by tag name, and I want to look at an element that's called title by tag name, and I want the title element, right? And I want to say, so this is, I'm just getting a hook to this thing. I want to get the first one, so the first title element with the only one that we have on the page, right? So this, can I make this equal to, without any variable, right, the ID that I want? Can I do this? And let's say if I did one of these, what does this do? So document get elements by tag name, the title, which is inside my index.html, this part, I'm targeting this inside the head, right? And I'm changing the title sneakily into whatever I want, right? Okay, is that possible? Okay, let's see. So going back to this and save, and let's see what I get now, right? So, okay, that's weird. So that is, it changed it, but it changed localhost 3000 contact and home and products and services and about and contact. So this kind of didn't do what I wanted to do. Not at all. All right. It's neat, right? But remember what I'm getting. ID is my link attribute for ID. That's what's happening here. And I want to push ID lowercase, right? So when I do this, what is actually happening? Let's view my page source here. So my page source, it says my title, which is this part, right, is the thing that I'm targeting, right? That's the stuff that I want to change. It actually is doing it, right? So this is my contact. It's actually doing it. So it's going in there and targeting the title tag and changing it, the ID, to whatever the ID is. Whereas the ID is a string, and if I do a console log to show you what that string looks like, console.log, and if I do the of ID, we're getting close, right? We got nothing. All right, so header loading, footer loading, and now we got a bit of another problem, right? It's ID right here, and I'm saying push state. The push state is working. So here's home as an example. Here's home, right? So let's go back to this and press enter. So this is okay, but as soon as I press this, it says uncaught type error, failed to set an index property on HTML collection. Index property setter is not supported. Okay. This is what it's saying. It doesn't know what I'm trying to do here, right? So what I can do is I can say something like let title equal to this. Let's do a console log of that. Console log. I can say that title now is equal to ID, and let's do a console log of that. All right. So again, home. It says home, products, and services, and about, and contact. You can see that that's what those say. It actually says this, but somehow when it comes to the actual changing this part, the actual ID to something else, what is this ID that I'm getting? So ID says it's home, product, services, about, and contact, but when I change my title, so I'm getting a reference to the title, which is the title tag. So it's not actually changing anything, right? Because look, I want to, but if I go to inspect, if I go to view page source, which is what I want to do here, right? Then you can see that physically in the head, nothing's changing. So if we would look it up, let's say change title in head of HTML document, right? With JavaScript, right? So there's two different ways it says we can change it. One of the ways we can change it is, it says WinRef. Nah, we're not going to use that. It's like really old. Like you can see the page is really old too. Document, window.document.title or WinRef, right? But I really physically want to change the title, like the actual title in the head, right? I want to overwrite its HTML code, like it says. We can write that window string beginning with the following HTML code, HTML head, right, title, but we'd have to rewrite the title. That's not cool, right? Now, here's something. In HTML, do you guys know here if the title, does it matter where I put the title? For example, let's say I put the title, if I move the title out of here, and if I put the title down here, if I said something like, hey, I want to put the title down here and put home, as an example, how does that work? Well, home gets placed in there, right? And it doesn't matter the order. The order is not that important, right? So if I take the title completely out, no title, and I go back in there, it's going to just give me this, contact, right? So it doesn't have anything in there. So what if I, instead of grabbing hold of the title, I create the title by appending it to the head? So let's try that. So here we had access to the title, but there is no title element. We want to get elements by tag name. We want to get the head, right? The head element. By the way, it would be nice, we have a document.body, right? It'd be nice if we had a document.head, and we do, right? So document.head, it basically points to the head of the document, the actual, that head part. So let head equal to document.head, just like we did with the document.title, right? The head of the document. And then what I want to do is I want to create an element, document.create create element, right? And I want to create a title element, right? And I want to store that in title. So title is actually going to be an element that I've created. And then I'm going to say title, and I want to have the value, or the inner HTML. Let's look at inner HTML is equal to ID. So we're going to comment this one out. So this would be the same thing. So I've made the title, and now what I want is I want to append it to the head. I'll say head.append child title. That's actually fooling around with the HTML, right? So if it worked, and it doesn't work, but if it worked, then when I go back to this, what it would do is, when I refresh, right, it would change this. So if I go to inspect, you can see that in the head, I don't have a title. I have a head, right? Here's my head element, but I don't have a title inside here. I can do anything in here, right? In this part of my body, but not in here, right? So far. And again, I'm looking at my index.html by default. That's what I'm looking at, right? So head, there's no title inside my head, right? Even though I'm doing this, okay? And again, you can see that when I go to my console, also, I got nothing. So that's another cryptic thing. So how come I'm not getting anything from my ID? Where's my ID coming from? My ID is coming from my link attribute, right? So I said, hey, I'm doing my nav links as an example. Here's my header. I'm getting access to my header. And then my header, I'm attaching my header. Right, that's what I'm doing. I'm getting my navigation. Here's my navigation. Getting my nav links. And for every nav link, right? For every nav link, depending on what I click, right? If I'm clicking on a nav link. So that means if I click on something, then I get this. Then I get this, right? See? Click on it, I got this. And if I view page source, then we should have a title, right? Title is there, but the title doesn't have anything inside of it, right? Because even though I did this, it doesn't work. It's cryptic the way it works, right? So products, you can see products is there. Services, about us, and see how I keep these and it doesn't go away because I'm not reloading my page. I'm never reloading my page, guys, right? So I've done this, and funny enough, when I change any of these, right, I can only ever have one title, right? And if I append child, I'm appending all these things. I'm trying to append my title over and over again. I'm not reloading the page. If I reloaded the page and I clicked on services, then that would say services. It would work one time. But if ever I checked anything else, it would always say services forever because I can't have more than one title. And again, I can show you that if I go view page source, right? So I can't have more than one title. I can try and add more than one title, but here you can see that there is no title, right? But I can't do it. So that is not going to work, right? What else could I do? What else do you guys? What else do you guys recommend? So again, I'm trying to replace my title, and when my title gets loaded, I mean, I can definitely do other things. Let's not do it this way. I get at all. So let's put my title back. So in my index.html, right? Here's my index.html. Let's put my title back. Okay, my title is back, and instead of replacing my title, so instead of like going target my head and all that stuff and replacing my title, that's a long way about a lot of work to do there, right? Then, we're struggling to make sense of this, right? So there's my ID. My ID is the thing. I'm actually changing my push state. My push state's changing my URL. And what about if I change my title here? So my ID would be my title as well. So ID dot is what I want. Push state does a lot for us, right? So notice we don't have a title So push date, even if I did that here, it doesn't really do much. However, what about if I did document, and instead of making my ID here, right, I made it kind of out here. It's because this is a local variable. ID won't live. I can say that ID, so I say I'll set my ID to nothing first of all. So my ID is nothing. Then I have my ID equal to the attribute. I sub ID in, right, as an example. And then when I'm done, before I go to my highlight active link, I go that document.title is equal to ID, whatever the ID is that I got. That does this part. And let's see what that does for us when we go back. So again, if I refresh, until I click on something, I have no document title, but you can see that I'm trying to replace it with something. Now the problem that I'm having is because my index.html has no title up here, it can't receive anything. It's almost like it doesn't exist. So if I could put, let's put something like index here. Anything, doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's not home or something else. If I do that, right, and if I refresh, it becomes index, but then I'm trying to replace it with my home or whatever it's going to be. See how it was index for a second? Watch. Index, and then it went away. That becomes home. My title changes to my localhost 3000 home, because if I go back to app.js, what is this? This is the thing that's happening. Document.title. Notice that this is nothing. No matter what I click here, right? Doesn't matter what I click. We're preventing default behavior. I'm setting my ID to this link.getAttributeID, and link, I'm looking at the nav links, and let's output that again, console log ID. So whenever I click on a nav link, I'm going to get home, I'm going to get products, I'm going to get services, I'm going to get about us, there it is. I'm going to get contact. But when I do document.title is equal to ID, let's try that. Here it works. Document.title is equal to ID. ID lives here and it's being used here, but it doesn't survive here, or it gets modified somewhere. So you notice again, home is here. Now this is okay. Products and services, about us, and contact, that works okay up here, right? These work okay down here, right? As an example. And now instead of doing this, which we don't have to do anymore, highlight active link is going to be based on what I click on, right? So if I go to home, it's clicked, products, services, it's highlighting. That's nice. And instead of switching on document title, I can simply switch on ID, right? Because that is, we already have it. Might as well use it. So if I go home, let's make sure it's working. So this isn't working. Let's take a look and see what I'm getting in my inspector for my console. So why? What's ID? What is ID here? This is like interesting. Console log. It's all scoping, eh? Yep. But that is this ID, not this ID. Okay, so we got a for loop, and in my for loop, I have an event listener, and my event listener is losing its my context. My context right now for this ID is not this ID. This ID is going to be empty, right? So what I can do, what if I used a fat arrow function instead? That should keep my content. And I can also add event listener. I can bind it to this. Just make sure that that's correct. Product, services, and home. But you see, I'm still not getting my ID. So it's like this ID is what I want to get. right? This ID, but I'm switching. This ID is basically being created right here, right? It's like I'm losing my content completely here. I'm not actually modifying anything because of this event listener. The event listener is actually killing what I'm doing, right? So one thing with the event listener is, if you notice, I have a thing that says a Boolean, right? And it says the Boolean is some options. So it appends an event listener, and my options are at the end. There's two options, right? One is the string for the event listener object, whatever it is, then some options, and add event listener options. And it says that sets a listener specific option for compatibility. This can be a Boolean, in which case the method behaves exactly as if the value was specified as options capture, right? When set to true, options capture prevents callback from being invoked when the event phase attribute is bubbling phase. False or not present, callback will not be invoked when the events is bubbling. So if I put true in here as an example, but this is not what I want. I want to bind. I want to bind to this, and what it can look like is something that looks like bind this, event.bind.this, and I don't think I have a context that I'm binding to, and I'm inside. It's just context, because what's happening is this is going to be what it is. I can't escape from the event listener, because the event listener is losing its context. Because the event listener, I have an event listener, and inside the event listener I have another event listener, and this is running in its own context as an example. And what I can do is anything that happens in here can work. That's okay. For example, if I take highlight active link, put it inside there, that will work. But anything outside of here won't survive, right? So the way to do this without any fancy footwork is keeping it the way it is. We'll pass in highlight active link. I know it's kind of a mangled scenario, right? And we'll pass in the ID that survived. So ID will go inside here, right? Which is like our event. Highlight active link will take the ID, right? And this is the ID. And then it'll be the ID that I'm making active, not the document. So when I'm passing in the ID, which is making the event happen, and then I'm going to return back out the ID. Right? I can do that. I can return out some kind of, I can pass the ID back out. So I'm passing it in, passing it out as an example, which highlights this nicely. Now you can see that it all highlights because all of them are active. See that they can all be active now. And it's actually a bright highlight, not like how it was before. So this is good, right? When the ID is equal to the anchor string, right? I want to change the class name, right? But the other ones have to be changed back. So the problem with this now, my highlight active link, is each one of them, as they get highlighted, stay highlighted, right? That's something that's going to change because highlight active link is being called from inside of here, right? So highlight active link. And again, I'm showing you the difficulties because we're dealing with a state, where we're passing stuff into this little code block is preventing ID from linking to this ID. This ID is something different. This is almost like a local version that's being lost, right? It's like I'm actually literally putting a let ID in there, right? A new ID that I want to have in there, right? So if I did this highlight active link and I passed in my ID or my document title, let's say, for example, instead of ID, I passed in document title, right? Or title or whatever, right? Well, the problem with that is once I pass my ID in there and I go up to here, then it says, okay, so go through each of the anchors, okay? And for each of the anchors where my ID matches, right, then change it up, right? But the problem is that it doesn't wipe out all the anchors first. So what I need to do is first go through the anchors, right? Wipe them all out, make sure that all of the the anchors are clear. So I'd have 2 of these for loops now, because what I'm not doing is I'm not ever going back to this page. The page is always going to stay the same, right? So for every anchor in anchors, then what I want to say that the class name starts off as inactive. So I don't have to do this. I'm literally going to say that all anchors, we're just going to set them to inactive, right? So the anchor, for every anchor in anchors, set all of those anchors as the class name to inactive. And what this is going to do is it's not going to include an active link. So when I go back, highlight active link again, every time I do that, I clean up the anchors, and then I only assign the one that makes sense. So now if I click onto it, now there's only one that should highlight, but not the other ones. Okay, so this is steps. We're moving forward step by step. So now we got this functionality back. Cool, I like this. This is good. Well, this is the one thing that's stable with us, right? We've changed this. This is actually being sustained. Whatever we've changed here is as the active link. That's staying, right? And home, I mean, we can't read the title. It seems like whenever we go back out to read the title, and I'm just now I'm looking at my load header again, right? So I'm like, okay, cool. So I make my ID, I change it, I set my document title to the ID, but whenever I try and read my document title out here, so let's say I say document.title, if I try and read it out here without me clicking anything, and I can set a default, by the way, I haven't done that yet, but if I go back out here, then it says index, right? That's my document title. I haven't been able to change that. Even though I changed it here, physically on the form, it doesn't change. So what I can do, because I know that this is happening, right, with my highlight active link, I can get my active link, whatever that active link is, as an example, right? And remember, again, right? Remember what we have to do. I pass it in. So this works, my highlight active link. Even though my highlight active link returns something, like, do I want to put everything in this thing? I mean, I could. That's the other pattern I could do. I could put inside this for loop, I could do all this, and that would save me all the trouble that I'm going through, right? In fact, why don't we just do that? And that'll solve it. It'll be a little bit messy, but it'll solve our problem for now. And then we'll try and figure out a way of, in this convoluted pattern that we've got going on, to get all the the stuff going on. So here you can see that I've got my nav link, blah blah blah. Excellent. I've rejigged this every single time. I don't need to return anything anymore because I'm not going to need to do that. What I can do instead is I can take all of this right here and put it inside of here, which looks funny. That's inside of my nav links. And we're going to rename these things to make them more reasonable names. See a bunch of we're closing all kinds of stuff now. Okay, so we take the ID, yay, right? And I switch on ID now. I do all this based on the ID that I'm in here. I might as well do this because I'm not getting this back anywhere anytime. Might as well. And now, if I click onto it, I have my contents like I had before. Okay. But one thing that's weird is when I load the page up for the first time, I have no content. So to fix this, right, then what if, going back to my index.html, we changed the, I just changed it to index just for testing purposes. If I change it back to home, right, even then, notice that home doesn't do anything. If I change from products to home to products, services, all that stuff works when I click on it one time. but by default, it doesn't really do anything because in my app.js, right, I don't have a default. So again, going here, right, as an example, my ID, there's no default when I go to my first link until I click on something, until I click on a link, right? So remember how this works. I load everything, I load my header and blah, 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 and whatever. Here's my nav links. I get a reference to my nav links. But until I click one of these nav links, I prevent my default behavior, and I don't do any of this stuff here until I, kind of come to here for the first time. Now here's what I know, right? What if I loaded my home content right away, right? So I call my home content right away before I do anything else. So before I do any of this stuff, I call my home content, then it's replace it. So example would be down in here, I say load my header. Well, I don't know want to load my header. Let's just load my home content once. Home content. And if I was to do this, then now you can see when it comes to my page, go to my first page, my home, click on home, products, services, about us, or contact us, it seems to work. The trick is if I go here for the first time, if I go to contact, it'll take me to welcome. Okay, and also there's another challenge. If I go here for the first time, I got no highlight. Right, I got no highlight. So I got to figure out when I do a first run, right? When I do a first run, how do I get that? How do I reset it to my home page for the first time? It's almost like I got a, first time load. When I come here, I first time load my page, and then I do everything else. Okay. But these are minor things. Now, before we go there, I'm going to delete my about page, my contact page, my products page, and my services page. I don't need them anymore. So let's delete them. So we'll say delete, and then I'll push it to GitHub for you guys. So no about page. Make sure we delete the right thing. No contact page. Right? No products page. No services page, just an index page. So this is this true single page application now, right, that's running. So if I go back and let's say if I restart my server, right, so down here what I want to do is, let's just save this, which will restart everything. You can see that even though I don't have my products page or my services page or my about page or my contact page, I have content that pops up that looks like it's another page. But look how fast it is. It's like super fast, right? And it looks like, wow, my page is blazing. But actually, it's a trick. It's one page that I'm loading right away, right? It's one page. So what I want to do is I want to do this. This is the last piece. I want to do this. But before we get there, let's push this up to GitHub, right? Because we have these 80 changes that I made. Take a look at all that, right? And by the way, notice all these this JavaScript history stuff. These are all the changes I made to my headers and everything else. It keeps track of it all, right? And that's why it has these 80 changes, right? So I'm going to kind of go to this. I'm going to say, again, I'll say added, changed to SPA, single page application. And then I'm going to go push, and let's see what happens when I do that. So if I look at my web page now, or my GitHub page for now, so the last thing I got is this lesson 9 stuff, and you can see change to SPA, change to SPA, change SPA, change SPA. I have this history link right now, this history link. And the history link is like, it keeps track of my history, like physically on my file, like of my files, right? Here. Okay. If I go and see what the build looks like, and I go out here, you can see that again. I don't have this highlighted, but if I go to products, now I'm having a problem. Right? Take a look. So it worked locally, right? But when I go to this page, right? If I go here, there is no page like that. I'm just pointing this out, guys, because yes, it works nicely for us to here, right? If I go here, yes, it works. But the challenge is I'm changing the URL to this, right? Locally, this doesn't look like this. Locally, this looks like this. Home. And so on, right? Home, products, services. But online, it doesn't work. Online, the problem is that when I go to products, it changes my Centennial to my Centennial College github.io/products. Right? It's almost like I need an extra piece, right? This would be really nice if I had my other piece that was out there, which would be the name of my site, right? The name of my site / this, right? Like for example here, I would want to replace all of this, right, to the name of my site / right? Here, and again, if I go to if I inspect, and if I go to my console, I'm looking at this. It says views content products.html, right? There is no views inside of Centennial College github.io, right? It doesn't exist. This link is being taken seriously by GitHub. This is their provider, and it's trying to go into this Centennial College. Look. /views content products.html. Doesn't work. Right? Why is that? Because of my code that's here. If I go to my scripts, my app.js, what I'm actually telling it to do when I load is I'm going to ./views partials header.html. Right? And what's happening is, indeed, I'm getting this. Okay, when I'm online, I'm getting these views, right? But then what's happening is it's saying, okay, go to Centennial College github.io/views. If I was to change to, and this is for the content, by the way. If I was to change this stuff here, load about content. Let's just do it for my home content, just for a second. If I take this dot away, and I said /views, and I push this up, so these are the changes I made. So notice it keeps track of my app history, which is not also desirable. But if I push this up, if I say, modified relative path for home content, right, to fix this problem. So I'm going to just try and do it with my home content. First of all, what does it look like locally? Always check locally before you push it up. Well, I already pushed it, but let's go locally. So locally, if I go to home, right, then it looks like it's okay, right? So I can go to home locally and it looks okay. If I go to contact, if I go to home up here, and let's just refresh. So I'm going to go back a couple steps until I get to that other spot there. So this place. Now if I click on home, right, it says the same thing as before, views, content, home. And there is no Centennial College github.io views, content, home. See that? Because I'm started out, because I've changed my URL, right, to home, it's taking a look at the new URL, this part right here. I've monkeyed with this thing, and it's taking a look at this. So what I need to do, right, is if I want to work with this online, it would work great if I owned my URL. Like, let's say, for example, I was targeting a custom URL like example.com, right? Then this would work great because I would own the URL and everything's fine. But this is for my entire github.io. I don't have a default website for my entire github.io. I could, right? I could do that. By the way, you could make, if you want to make a GitHub page and you want to make a new repository for this, then you can have your default page. For example, for me, if I go to my website, celiopoulos.com, right, if it still works, then you're going to see a little game that you can play, right, MailPilot. But this game is listed inside of my GitHub page. So if I go to github.com, and if I look at repositories, let's look at my repositories. Here's my repos, right? And if I search for celiopoulos.github.io, which is right here, right? Celiopoulos is my account name, right? github.io is the way you make it for the whole account, right? So this is your whole account, github.io, right? And I have a CNAME, I have no Jekyll, and I have a CNAME file that points to my domain name, celiopoulos.com, right? Which I own. And then my provider, I'm using GoDaddy, I point GoDaddy to GitHub, this link, right? And when I do that, when I go to celiopoulos.com, it redirects to GoDaddy, through GoDaddy to this site, and that would be okay, right? Because if I was to redirect to make a single page application, because this site computes, celiopoulos.github.io, right, then it would be no problem. But the reason why this isn't working, and by the way, it will work if you were to, if you could put this in, like if this is you, not me, and it's your site, and you didn't specify a repo, then this would work for you for your portfolio, because your portfolio could be your account name.github.io. Here I can't because I own Centennial, and that's why it's failing. Otherwise, this would totally work, this idea. Okay, so that's why it doesn't work here for me. Okay. I'm just explaining this to you. Now, there's ways to fix this, but there's a bit of convolution involved, and it may not be worth us going through that whole exercise. But there's a couple of problems that we still have, even locally. So let's just work locally for now, right? And one of the challenges we have is this idea, this home content stuff. It's like I want to do this switcher, right? Based on my ID. I want to set my document title to whatever it's going to be, and then I want to switch it. I want to do both at the same time. I want to make it so it looks like I go through all this rigmarole, this part right here, more than once. Which means I can do this if I extract this whole piece here into something like a method or another function. So this whole piece, right, going from that's inside here, this nav links, for each of the nav links, instead of kind of clicking on each of the nav links and having this happen, this part, this let ID is equal to link get attribute ID, this part, and document.title is equal to ID, and pushing all this kind of stuff out. All this part right here, right? I want to create a method right here that does all this for me, this part. So let's make that. We'll call this like, set page content or something like that. Function set page content. We'll take in an ID, which is important. And I will take all of this stuff, cut it, and put it inside my area here, right? where I pass in the ID, it does this push state, highlights the active link, and all that kind of stuff, right? And we will call this here set page content, right? Set page content to the ID. Pass in the ID, set page content, it does all that work for me, right? But what I can do is, regardless of whether this is working or not, as long as I have my header, before I get my nav links that are clicked on, before I click on any one of my nav links, I can already push a set page content to something else. Home, as an example. All right, so here's my header data. I get my header data, and as soon as this is ready, I can say set page content to home. Okay. And now this should fix my error. Let's see if I do it locally. So locally, I go home, it highlights home, it does this. And this is if I simply go to this. It does everything for me by default. So if I go here, 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 and here, it still works. And if I refresh, here, it still works. And that's how you would do that part. Couple more things that I would do to change. So this looks neat, set page content. Set page content, whatever I set the page content to, it'll switch and load the content. This is good, right? So I don't need to do it anymore here. This home content can go away because that is kind of doing the same thing, right? As you can see. Load header doesn't really load header. It's like it kind of loads you know, the content, the entire, like loads the site. You know, this is almost like site initialize more than anything else. That's what this does now. And if I really want to, I can load my footer in sequence after I load my header. It's not required, but maybe my footer is going to need to be somehow linked to my header information. And so what I want to do is I want to put it in here in my set page content. So when I set my page content, I set my footer as well. And if I did that, and if I go to it, you can see that here I'm good, and if I click here, 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 or here, I'm also good, right? So that's good. And now this is like initialize site. So I can rename this, so refactor rename to initialize site. Sorry, refactor rename symbol, initialize site. And what initialize site does will do everything that I want it to do, and now it's contextual. So my start function is really small. And all the work that's being done is being done inside of initialize site and set page ID, says page content. Okay. So this is an example of a single page application that will work even online if you have your own website, right? Totally will work just like this. And it'll make it look and feel like as if it's its own site. Now, here's something. If I went to this site contact, it'll switch me to home, right? So you can never go. One disadvantage is you can't. You wouldn't be able to save a URL link. And the way we're doing it right now, you can't save a URL link like, for example, contact page. I want to go to my contact page. I want to save that, or a downloads page. It would take you to the main page by default every time because there is no contact page. It just doesn't exist, right? I don't have a processor. I don't have a router or anything like that to do it. This is all front end stuff, right? That's how it works, right? So, so that's how this works the way it does, right? Again, if I was going to make this work online, the only way that I can make this work online, like up on GitHub, let's show you what that is. So if I go to github.com, because of GitHub Pages, I'm not looking at Centennial College as this. This is for this link. I'd have to have a repository called centennialcollege.github.io. So let's say if I made that, if I said something like that, so Centennial College. It'd have to be exactly the name of my repo, by the way. like that, centennialcollege.github.io, right? It doesn't matter whether it's public or private. If it was public, let's say, and I create my repository. So this is the main centennialcollege.github.io page, right? So if I was to push, I can add another remote, and this is something that I can show you how to do too. So where it says git remote add origin, you don't have to do git remote add origin. You can git remote add main or some other remote. I'm pushing to another repository at the same time. I can have more than one remote. So here, in here, I can say, let's add a new remote. So I can do simply something like git remote add, and I make a new friendly name, something like Centennial College. So like really hard. So for me to do this would be, I would have to be really sure, because it's got to be like this. And then I would take the URL for this part, and then populate it in here. Okay, so that's the URL for that remote, a new remote that I'm making, a new connection. I can have more than one. So now if I go git remote, I have two. I have Centennial College and I have Origin. Origin is my main remote, the one that I'm using. So if I want to push this stuff that I've done now, first of all, I got all these little history updates in this app.js. Let's put that up to div. So I'll say fixed spa issues, right? So I'll add that all into the staging area as an example. And then I want to make a commit. But instead of pushing it here, I'm going to push it down here. I'm going to say git push origin master. So that pushes the master branch in the origin remote. But I can also go do git push Centennial College master. And I'll do a -u for the first time. Actually, I better not. Sorry. Git push Centennial College master. And it's going to do that too. It's going to push there. So if I have both, I push both the same exact repository to two different sites. So if I go to refresh, you can see now that I have this, right? So this Centennial College GitHub.io is correct, right? And there's a view page for this, right? And if I go to change my settings, I can go change my settings on Centennial College now. This is for the entire experience, And if I scroll down to where I want to do GitHub Pages, it says, guess what? Your site is published already on GitHub Pages, right? By default. So if I click there, then you can see immediately I go home. And if I go to Products, Services, About Us, and Contact Us, it's doing exactly what I'm telling you it's going to do. It's perfect. And it works super fast, guys. So that is your single page application, my friends. And this is how a lot of the bigger front-end frameworks work. Like we've talked about before. And the two big ones that kind of operate this way, the big ones are Angular, right? Which kind of it's a single application framework, single page application framework that uses AJAX on the back end. And it used to use jQuery, it doesn't use jQuery anymore. As well as React, so React.js also does the same thing. It creates this idea of a single application, single page application that's on the front end, and it uses AJAX again to kind of push to this front end. So it, as a front end framework, it looks like you have multiple pages, but actually you're composing your page and you're creating it and you're storing it in your Angular on the front end, right? That's all that's happening. You're composing the page just like I am. I'm creating the page, I'm composing it, and I'm making you feel like it's your main page. But the reality is it's not, right? It's not your main page. It's something totally different. Now you can have multiple pages if you want. You don't have to have one page that rules them all. You can have your index.html. You can have the other ones if you want to be able to bookmark, especially if you have important pages like, let's say, a downloads page. You don't want the downloads page to go maybe through your main page. You might have a, like this getting started page as an example, this docs, right? For Angular. Again, this is loading automatically, but if I said something like, hey, I want to download and install, how do I get started, right? And if I want to copy this link right now, Angular works differently than what I'm doing right now, guys, so it's not exactly this way, but it tells you all the installation steps. I want to be able to go here, right? So if I go to, from the beginning, if I was to copy this into a new window, it should take me right there, right? I should be able to, kind of bookmark this page. The way I have it, nothing's going to get bookmarked because these pages don't really exist, right? Here, I'm actually composing the page when I need it because Angular does that. There's extra code on the back end that does that on the front end that does all that for you. More code than I have, okay? But the idea, the concept is the exact same. That really Angular or React or Vue or Svelte, that's the other one. So Svelte. Svelte is the new framework, right? So there's the new kid on the block, Svelte. Any one of these, they do the same thing. They modify your page so it seems like it's a single page app. It seems like multiple pages, but it's truly just a single page application. All right, questions around this strategy, this technology that we're using. And again, I showed you the disadvantage of it. If you don't own it, the site, notice how I was trying to do a regular GitHub page, wouldn't work, right? But if I have a custom site that I have, for example, if I go to Centennial College right now, if you go to centennialcollege.github.io, you go there and you'll see this little thing that I have, and you'll be able to use the single page application and it won't break, right? Just like normal. You can go to all these links here and no problem. Now where we might have problems is when I reset or something else, or if I try and redirect back to a certain page, that might be a problem. I have to make sure that all buttons and everything on my page redirect me back to where they're supposed to go, right? And I can be strategic about that, right? But for the most part, it works great. So questions around this, guys, because I'm going to stop this. I'm going to move into another topic next week. Now, do you have to do this? Here's a question for you guys. Do you think you have to do this for your mini portfolio site? The answer is you don't have to go to this level. That's not what I'm asking you guys to do for your assignment. In the assignment details, I went to this level because I wanted to show you what you could do, right? But this is not what you have to do. What you have to do for me, right? I'm just going to look at that one more time, is what it tells you to do, right? Which is create a new file, header.html, and populate your page header, which should include your main nav. Create a new file, footer.html, and populate your footer, and so on. Create appropriate JavaScript methods and code that uses AJAX to load and inject your HTML and footer into your page. That's it. I'm not asking you to, inject your content into your page, okay? That's not what I'm asking for. That would be a way more difficult assignment. You can see what challenges I had in putting it together. That's not the exercise. All right, the exercise is when you do this, you definitely have to inject your header and footer, but not your content. You can have multiple pages. Go back to that multiple page idea of a couple of pushes ago. And by the way, if you want to get to go to that spot when we did all that, where my header and footer was being injected but not my content, then that is, if you look up on GitHub, so if you go to github.com /Centennial, so this one, I mean, if I go to here, right, then you can see that, remember we have these 24 commits, but I've kind of labeled it, right? So here's restructure project to switch pages, loaded partial header with AJAX. This is probably where it's going to be a couple of days ago, right here. So let's take a look at this one. You can go to code, and this is a good example of how this works. And if you look at your scripts, and if you look at your app.js, this is the old way we did it, which is we had a loading of the header, and we had a loading of the footer, and we did this. right? Where we had, you load the header, you do your content switcher, and then, as an example, you load your footer, right? So this is kind of what we did there. That's really at the level that you need to do for you, all right? The rest is the content itself is housed inside of each of your pages. So if you look at the pages, that's all you'd have to do. So if you go back, and if you look at on GitHub, again, this is an example of how to do stuff. If I look at my index.html, you can see that there is no header and footer. We are injecting it, but the content is physically in the page. And that's all you have to do for the 3 pages that are part of your mini portfolio. Okay, you don't have to inject your content. It's not required. Now, if you do, and you're able to pull it off, that's great. Let me know about it. Maybe I'll give you a bonus. But I'm not going to require it. Okay, it's totally not required. And I don't think I put that in as a bonus. Let's take a look and see if there is. Sometimes I put it in as, hey, it's as a bonus, make it happen. But I would do it. If you wanted to, I would offer 4 bonus marks, or 5. Let's make it 5 bonus marks if you did that. All right, so I'm telling you live, if you were to make it so that it worked the way I'm showing you here, and you injected all your content and made it work properly, and I could go up on your website and see that content work, then yeah, I'll give you 5 bonus marks. I think it's a good exercise, because then you've made your single page application with AJAX, which is probably more than most people know how to do. Okay, that's it for me, guys. I'm running over time. I'm going to stop streaming at this point, and I'll take questions.